Good evening, welcome. It's Wednesday, June 3rd, a couple minutes after 6. It's my pleasure to call to order a sparsely attended meeting of the Freeport Planning Board. We do have a member who's out sick tonight, and then we are down a seat currently. So if anyone here or watching knows of anybody who's really excited to join our board, best way to do that is to fill out a volunteer application if you're interested and have ideally some sort of relevant experience, but that's very broadly defined. It can be almost anything, including enthusiasm. So
Right, enthusiasm. Those applications are right at the desk right there.
Yep, or they're online.
By the town clerk or online.
Yep, and we actually we will have a change because we did have 2 vacant seats. One of them has been filled already, but that member is not able to join us tonight because he had previous plans. So
Do we know
anyway,
who?
what's that?
In information exchange, will we hear who?
Yeah, I can.
okay.
Yeah, it is public. Yeah. Well, yeah, great segue. Item number 1 is information exchange.
Yeah, so I'll just start out with that real quick. So, board kind of shifting. David and Bonnie, since the last meeting, have both resigned from the board. Last night, council approved one person for one of the seats, Adam Wallace. He's an architect. People on the board paying attention to recent projects might have seen Adam. He was the architect on the Domus project on Depot Street. That was recently approved. So, I'm sure he'll bring a lot of relevant and good experience to the board. So we're looking forward to that.
Yep. He's a friend of mine too, although I did not recruit him. He found the board of his own volition.
Good.
But
Good. Sounds great.
Yep.
Yeah. But yeah, so again, if anyone watches this back or any board members, it can be tough to find people who are not only interested, but also have the ability to commit to the time of meeting every month and sometimes more than once a month. So if you have any ideas, feel free to push them in my direction. If they have any questions on the process of joining or on what goes into the board and they would just want to talk it through. All right. Last month, the project review board had pretty light agenda, but a couple things. They approved a new pavilion at Memorial Park that the town is going to put in. I think right now there's a temporary platform there where some concerts are held occasionally. This is going to be a more permanent pavilion structure. So that had to go through a minor...
Same spot?
Yeah. Yeah, sort of in the back where by the tracks on that side. And then the Harrisecret Ridge subdivision, that 80-unit, 40 duplex subdivision that was approved on North Route 1. So a couple months ago, that had gone to the PRB for an extension, which was approved. They came back last month for a revised phasing plan. So originally, that project was approved under 2 phases. And because it's a pretty large project with a lot of infrastructure going in, their performance guarantee requirement for those 2 phases was fairly large. So they are essentially, for the purposes of breaking it out into smaller segments to reduce that PG burden at any one time, they just revised the phasing into kind of 11 kind of pockets. The construction will still, I think the idea is to take place linearly and, over, I think it's a 5-year period is what they're estimating currently. But the board approved that, so it should make it a little more financially feasible for construction purposes. So they're going to wrap up their conditions of approval, and then so we might see more there with that project starting. So that'd be good. And then zoning amendments reviewed by council. I don't think we had any this past month. And then the last reminder is June 23rd, we're going to have that joint workshop with council, the planning board, and council they brought up last time. So as we get closer to that later this month, we'll get materials, any background materials out to the board.
Where is the Aroma Joe's and the PRB schedule?
They did their pre-application with staff. So their next step would be to submit an application for their sketch plan review.
So they're in the works.
Yep.
Good, thank you.
That's it.
All right.
And we don't have any minutes. That was theirs a
Yep.
placeholder.
All right.
Good, I was wondering
Yeah.
why I missed them.
Yeah,
Highly
yeah, that
unlikely
was,
that we'd be able
Prepared to be embarrassed.
Item number 3 is a discussion, so no public hearing tonight, but zoning text amendment for the net residential acreage definition. We'll be discussing a potential amendment to said net residential acreage definition in the zoning ordinance to remove parking areas that are within multifamily developments from the list of features subtracted out of the total parcel acreage. So when net residential acreage is counted, you take the size of the lot, subtract all sorts of stuff, steep slopes, wetlands, unbuildable areas, and under the current definition, also parking areas that are planned. And so this would be an amendment to basically remove that part of it. So fairly simple. Kyle, I'm sure you can add a lot more context.
yeah. I mean, I think there could be a larger conversation around net residential acreage at some point. I know there's been comments through various committees and groups talking about switching to a gross residential acreage, and I think we can have that conversation at some point. It would be a much bigger effort than like making changes throughout zoning and subdivision ordinances, whereas this would be a fairly kind of bite-sized change that would be relatively quickly and could still make a pretty meaningful impact right away. But basically, this was highlighted after the recent C1 changes specifically. So the reason this hasn't been coming to mind lately is because, with the recent downtown projects where they're in one single building, those multifamily projects fall under the exemption and only go through site plan review, not subdivision review. And the net residential acreage calculation only applies when there's a subdivision, not site plan. So
That's bizarre right there.
Yes and no. I mean, we did it so an apartment house wouldn't have to go, like the one next door over here, wouldn't have to go through subdivision. Because there's multiple units in it. Am I correct?
Right, no, I'm down with them not having to go through subdivision. I don't understand why the calculations would only be present then. But anyway, go ahead. It's
because subdivision, so with a subdivision, you're likely to have actual roads, and it's not, those multifamily projects in single buildings, right? It'll just be a driveway into a parking lot and the apartment building, much like a commercial development. Whereas subdivisions, you could have right-of-ways and all sorts of things that are going to take away from the actual parcel itself. But that's essentially the
Okay.
point that we're trying to make here, is that when you're looking at things like wetlands and surface water bodies and steep slopes, and then
Areas.
roads, new roads that are being used for frontage purposes and are creating public or private right-of-ways, those are all things that you can't build on. They're used for those. It's either a natural resource or, you're not going to build a new building in the middle of the road. The parking is just completely different. It's very much a buildable piece of land, and under different zoning standards, you very well could build there in the future. I mean, a developer might build more parking than they're required to build just because they think people will be interested in that.
Or build on top of it, or?
Yeah, and then someone in the future, a new developer takes it over and they say, well, no, we don't think we need that much parking and, we're going to, do some infill development on the parking lot. Or a minimum parking requirement can change and, lower the amount of parking needed. But either way, if the idea of net residential acreage is to take out the land that's not suitable for development, well, those parking lots are suitable for development. They're just being used for parking. And removing parking from this definition doesn't change the fact that people still have to comply with parking requirements. It's not like adequate parking is no longer going to be provided. There's still any number of other standards that will guide the scale and form of development on a site.
Stormwater.
Yeah, stormwater regulations, impervious allowances.
Impervious, that's right.
Buffering, all those sorts of things. But it specifically was relevant with the C1 changes where we were encouraging multifamily, but multifamily buildings broken up into multiple smaller scale buildings, because those won't be able to take advantage of that exemption. They'll most likely have to go through subdivision to reach the amount of density that they want. So this change would, I think, greatly help those projects and would lean into a number of goals that we talked about in the comp plan. I mean, the example I gave in the site is, the same size site could go from, leaving it as is, you go from 40-something units allowed to 60-something units allowed by changing it. And those 60-something units can very easily fit on that site, with our recent changes to, allow 80% impervious and 4-story buildings or something
Height
like that.
changes and all that stuff.
So there's no functional reason other than if you wanted to artificially limit density for whatever reason, you're worried about service capacity or, you just.
That's the only reason.
But it seems like it'd be better to do it with a different mechanism.
Correct.
Right, and we already have checks for those things. We have, when projects go to the project review board, they have to show that they have adequate capacity. So, staff felt like it made sense. I was looking at it, I talked this through with a few other people in the office as well. No one raised any real concerns, so we felt like it made sense. And if the board wanted to pursue going through with it, we could just bring the draft amendment for public hearing next month.
The draft amendment, is it really as simple as, well, it's
Yeah.
not quite as simple as crossing out and parking, right? Like, these two standards up top under A, 1 and 2 basically are the same then, right?
Yeah, I mean, I could look at consolidating it into one standard instead of two. But it could also just cross out and parking and I think function in a way that makes sense too.
Yep.
Well,
But then you have like the definition of road versus the definition of right-of-way.
So road is defined,
Just the width of the road rather than the width of the whole right-of-way? Is that kind of the?
I think road is defined as something that gives frontage. So not like an access driveway. So for instance, if there was a multifamily development, let's say, there were 10 buildings, like a townhome set up, and there was a drive throughout the development, but it was all under a condo and an HOA, so there weren't individual lots broken out. That road throughout the development wouldn't technically be a road. It would just be like an access driveway, and it wouldn't necessarily meet that criteria for being subtracted out. Whereas a frontage road, which would come along with a right-of-way, would be subtracted out. So if someone was dividing lots out, or if someone was doing a townhome project, but it was also a mixed-use project, and they were dividing it into a few different lots where they had some townhomes on one lot and an apartment building on one lot and, a commercial or mixed-use building on another lot. They might still build a road for frontage purposes, so that would get subtracted out.
So still all have to be built to town specs, right?
Yeah.
Well,
So there's a width of the right-of-way we require.
Yeah, the issue with, like, Mitch, I think going back to what you brought up, originally, a couple of years, like right after I first started, when the board was talking about adding in that exemption for multifamily buildings, we raised the question of whether the exemption should apply to just a single apartment building or projects where there were multiple multifamily buildings. And the reason the board only made the exemption for one is because we don't, or one of the reasons is because we don't have strict design standards for those access drive situations. And until where we do have stricter standards and subdivision
It's in
for
subdivision,
roads.
yeah.
Yeah.
well,
So in the future, if we create more strict, I think, design standards for those kind of access roads, like larger scale access roads, out of subdivision, then I think we could just consider, exempting multifamily altogether from subdivision, and then it would take out the NRA and everything. But this would be a fairly simple stopgap to that point.
Seems very much in the spirit of what we've been working for.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, I didn't think you'd have any objections. You brought up the only thing I care about or was thinking about, which is why aren't we getting rid of the deductions altogether and dealing
Yeah.
with gross area? But I heard you say it's harder and this is immediate and needed, and so that's.
I'd like to think, I think there's definitely something there, but I think that does warrant more thought.
Because you
think
might
that-
want to change the numbers as
Yeah,
a
and
result.
yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, and I think there's different implications, if you do that in the growth areas versus not the growth areas. Like, there's a lot of parcels. We're seeing more kind of dead-end, single-family type subdivisions coming forward in our rural areas than, at least I did, like the first year and a half I was here. And a lot of those parcels are largely wet and steep slopes, and, so you take it out. If you just get rid of it and you go gross residential acreage throughout the whole town, all of a sudden those rural subdivisions.
Could be
You could
dense.
bump up the density a little bit. They're never going to be dense like apartment buildings or anything because we don't allow multifamily there. But they could be denser and start demanding more services than what we currently see. So there is some consideration with that to be had.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm not hearing anything, so.
We'll bring it forward
yeah, I'll
next
bring it next month
right.
for hearing, and yeah, we can go from there. All right, sounds good.
cool. Well, I think we have.
Are there persons wishing to
Yeah,
address? Right.
No one's
We're
online.
still on our agenda. Yeah, anyone wishing to address the board on non-agenda items? All right. Do I hear a motion to adjourn
Move we adjourn the meeting.
in a second?
Second.
Kari, all in favor? All right, we have 6.5, 7 minutes until public workshop at 6:30.